Israel was formed by 12 tribes, descendants of the sons of Jacob. One of these tribes, the Danites, was founded by Dan, one of Jacob's sons. Although the Bible does not give many details about Dan, it mentions some important facts about his tribe. Based on this information, an ancient Christian interpretation suggests that the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan. Conversations about the Antichrist always generate a lot of attention and curiosity. But how did the idea that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan arise? Is there any biblical basis for this interpretation? Who was Dan, and what is the true story of his tribe in the Bible? Let's explore all these questions in this video. Let's start by understanding who Dan was. Jacob, Dan's father, had 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife, but she could not have children for many years. In those days, being barren was a big problem, as it could lead to family scorn, personal shame, lack of support in old age, and even be seen as a sign of divine disapproval, since having children was considered a blessing from God. In the ancient Near East, when a legitimate wife could not get pregnant, she could ask her servant to have a child with her husband. This way, the husband would have an heir, and the official wife would be the legal mother of that child. This happened with Sarah and Hagar. Abraham had a son, Ishmael, with Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian servant. Similarly, Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, could not have children and suffered greatly, while her sister Leah, also Jacob's wife, had already given him several sons. Rachel remained childless. Desperate to have a child, Rachel offered her servant Bilhah to Jacob so that he could have a child with her. Bilhah had a son, and Rachel named him Dan, believing that God had heard her prayers and given her a child. Jacob's family was full of tensions and rivalries, as he had 12 sons with 4 different women, Leah, Rachel, and the servants Bilhah and Zilpah. Polygamy in Jacob's family caused a lot of jealousy and conflicts. Dan, being the son of a servant, probably had a difficult social position. Although he was recognized as Jacob's legitimate son, his mother Bilhah did not have the same status as Leah and Rachel. This means that Dan grew up in an environment full of family disputes. The rivalry between Leah and Rachel affected not only them, but also the relationships between their children. Dan, along with his brothers, helped with daily tasks, such as taking care of the animals and working the land. These shared activities promoted cooperation, but also increased rivalries. One example is when Joseph, Rachel's son, was betrayed and sold by his brothers. Although Dan is not specifically mentioned in this episode, he was certainly affected by the atmosphere of distrust and hostility. The Bible also tells us that Dan had a son named Hushim, or Shuam. In the book of Genesis, we read about the prophetic blessings Jacob gave to his sons. These blessings spoke about the future of each son and how they would be part of the nation of Israel. In other words, Jacob was prophesying about the history of the tribes of Israel. Regarding Dan, Jacob's blessing was as follows: Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. Scholars have interpreted these words about the tribe of Dan in various ways. The most accepted interpretation is that Jacob was describing the characteristics that the tribe of Dan would show in the future. For example, in the first part of the blessing, Jacob says that the tribe of Dan would judge its people. And indeed, for some time, this tribe did administer justice among the Israelites. Samson, one of the judges of Israel, was from the tribe of Dan. In the second part of Jacob's blessing, the tribe of Dan is compared to a treacherous serpent that bites the horse's heels to throw the rider off. This could symbolize the aggressiveness and the use of deceptive strategies by the tribe of Dan. Even though it was smaller than other tribes, Dan was cunning and dangerous, capable of attacking larger nations without mercy. This aligns with the words of Moses in Deuteronomy 33:22, where he refers to Dan as a lion's cub that leaps out of Bashan. After the conquest of Canaan, led by Joshua, the land was divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe of Dan received a portion of land in the central western part of Canaan, near the tribes of Ephraim, Benjamin, and Judah. This area included cities like Zorah, Eshtaol, and Aijalon. Although the location was strategic, the Danites faced many conflicts with stronger local peoples. Initially, they had difficulty expelling the inhabitants and taking full possession of the land. In Judges 1:34, we read that the Amorites pushed the Danites into the mountains, preventing them from coming down into the valley, which led the tribe to seek other areas to settle. Due to the difficulty in dominating their original land, a group from the tribe of Dan sought new areas to live. In Judges 18, we see that they sent spies who found the city of Laish in the far north of Canaan. Laish was a peaceful and vulnerable city. The Danites attacked Laish, killed its inhabitants, renamed the city to Dan, and rebuilt it in their own way. Even so, some members of the tribe of Dan remained in their original land. Since the city of Dan was in the far north of Israel, the expression "from Dan to Beersheba" was used in the Bible to indicate the northern and southern limits of the land of Israel. In the city of Dan, a sanctuary with a priesthood that eventually became corrupted by idolatry was established. At that time, the center of worship was in Shiloh, where the tabernacle was located before Jerusalem became the religious capital during the time of King David. However, the Danites decided to have their own center of worship, disobeying God. At the end of Judges chapter 18, we see that the Danites set up a carved image stolen from Micah as an idol and made Jonathan, the grandson of Moses, their priest, showing deep spiritual corruption. This inclination towards idolatry had lasting consequences. The city of Dan became a symbol of infidelity to God, being one of the first tribes to stray from true worship. Later, during the period of the divided kingdom, King Jeroboam established the worship of the golden calf in the city of Dan, reinforcing its idolatrous and disobedient stance. Idolatry in Dan contributed to the division and spiritual weakness that eventually led the nation into captivity and the dispersion of the tribes of Israel. The strategic location of the tribe of Dan, especially after moving north, made it a frequent point of confrontation with enemies such as the Philistines and other Canaanites. Samson, one of the most famous judges of Israel, was from the tribe of Dan, and his life was marked by violent confrontations with the Philistines, showing the ongoing struggle of the Danites to maintain their identity and territory. Where did the idea that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan originate? The absence of Dan in the list of sealed tribes in the book of Revelation led some theologians to speculate that this has a special significance. One theory is that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan. Irenaeus of Lyons, one of the church fathers of the 2nd century, was one of the first to suggest this. He believed that the aggressive and treacherous nature of Dan, as prophesied by Jacob, could indicate that the Antichrist would come from this tribe. The proponents of this theory also mention the idolatrous behavior of the Danites in biblical history and the prophecy of Jeremiah about the judgment of Judah, which says that from Dan would be heard the sounds of their swift horses. Jeremiah 8:16. The truth is that this interpretation is more allegorical than based on a direct reading of biblical texts. There is no passage in the Bible that clearly states that the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan. This idea is based on inferences and thematic connections, not clear statements from Scripture. Jacob's prophetic words were fulfilled in the history of the tribe of Dan, and Jeremiah's prophecy referred to the sins and judgments of Judah, speaking about the destruction during the Babylonian captivity. Therefore, there is nothing in this prophecy that connects the tribe of Dan to the emergence of the Antichrist at the end of times. The list of the tribes of Israel in the book of Revelation, which does not include the tribe of Dan, is generally seen as symbolic, as the text uses a lot of symbolism. This omission may reflect specific theological or literary issues in Revelation, and not necessarily a prophecy about the Antichrist. For example, Dan was not the only tribe associated with idolatry. Ephraim, the principal tribe of the northern kingdom, was also known for this sin and is also not listed in Revelation. Therefore, linking the absence of Dan in Revelation exclusively to the Antichrist may be an oversimplification. It is more likely that the absence of Dan and Ephraim in the list of Revelation is a critique against idolatry, as Revelation strongly condemns this behavior. It is worth noting that the Danites violated the covenant by choosing another territory instead of the land the Lord gave them, and this choice did not have divine approval. Some scholars suggest that the absence of Dan in Revelation shows the severity of God's judgment against idolatry and serves as a warning to all believers about the need for faithfulness to the Lord. Moreover, it is highly unlikely that the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan, as the northern tribes of Israel were so dispersed during the exile that it is not possible to trace a reliable lineage from a specific tribe. Therefore, when someone says that the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan, know that this is pure speculation without a biblical basis. Instead of focusing on uncertain theories, we should concentrate on what truly matters about the history of the tribe of Dan to avoid the same mistakes and remain faithful as followers of Christ. The history of the tribe of Dan teaches us the need to always be vigilant against idolatry in our lives. We cannot worship anything other than the true God, as the Danites did. We need to identify and eliminate anything that takes the place of God in our hearts, whether it be material possessions, social status, or other priorities that distract us from our devotion to the Lord. The history of the tribe of Dan, with its difficulties in settling and its deviations, shows us the importance of remaining faithful to God, even in difficult times and times of temptation. Unlike the Danites, who turned away from God seeking security and success on their own, we must trust in divine provision and guidance, even in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. The absence of Dan in the list of sealed tribes in Revelation reminds us of the seriousness of God's judgment against idolatry and infidelity. However, we also see God's grace, willing to redeem and restore. We are called to reflect on our lives, seeking repentance and renewal, and to live in a way that honors our covenant with the Lord. Leave in the comments if you already knew the history of the tribe of Dan and what you think about the theory that the Antichrist will come from this tribe. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos. God bless you.